All right, well, hello everyone. My name is Will Welch, and I am a science teacher at Aquinas High School in La Crosse, Wisconsin. Within the science department, I teach AP Physics, Physics, and Physical Science. So through those three courses that I teach both freshmen and seniors. So that's an interesting opportunity for me to see how different freshmen and seniors can be on a daily basis. This is my second year of professional teaching. Prior to teaching at Aquinas High School, I taught at the Carmen School of Science and Technology in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Carmen is a public charter school, so it partners with Milwaukee Public Schools in the hopes that the techniques and the strategies that teachers there use, both academically and behaviorally, could then be transferred to Milwaukee Public High Schools in the hopes that the urban education in Milwaukee is improved for all of the youth in Milwaukee. In terms of student demographics between the two schools that I've taught at, they are quite different, and it's provided me with interesting experiences in both places. Carmen, being in Milwaukee, it was more of a lower socioeconomic status population, 95% African American, whereas here at Aquinas High School, it's more affluent, probably a 95% white student population. So based on that student population, the experiences that I've had within the classroom have been drastically different at both places, but both places have provided me with phenomenal opportunities and experiences to ultimately make me a better educator. So without further ado then, jumping into my e-portfolio, the main goal that I had in this portfolio was to keep my philosophy of education at the center. I really wanted all of my artifacts. I wanted all of the standards to show that I truly believe in my philosophy of education, and it's something that as educators we all should be proud of and be determined to achieve. So without reading through all of the text that I have here, my philosophy of education can really be summed up by saying that I want all of my students to be the owners or the catalysts or protagonists of their learning, and by doing that, I want them to be able to make mistakes. I want them to be creative. I want them to take risks, because ultimately, I want them to be prepared for their future. I mean, let's face it. The reality is our world is changing at a dramatic rate, and we have no idea what our students' futures are going to look like a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. So we're doing them a disservice if we're solely focused on things that have worked in the past in education. So it's our job as teachers to also be willing to make mistakes, be willing to take risks, and to try and push ourselves outside of our own comfort zone so we can push our students outside of theirs. And ultimately, that's going to place them in a position to be successful, again, not only in the present, but more importantly, in their future. So with this in mind, the standard that I really want to focus on in this presentation is our first standard, and that's that candidates demonstrate an understanding and are able to apply knowledge and skills specific to their discipline. I think that this standard really highlights a couple things. First, it highlights our understanding of our own content. And it also demonstrates our understanding of the things that we've learned throughout this program. How can we morph our content, and how can we morph the things that we've learned in this program? So in this way, the first artifact that I selected to show mastery of this standard was the final reflection paper in my first course in this program, which was CNT 709, which was Foundations of Curriculum. Now, being a science teacher, and throughout this whole course, I tried to keep all of my work relevant to my own practice or relevant to the things that I'm trying to teach. So my goal in this paper was to take a look at science education and science curriculum as a whole and analyze it, looking for shortcomings, looking for successes, looking for ways that it can be improved. I think that there's a stigma around science education. It doesn't really matter what subject within science we're talking about, but I think there's this stigma that it's a content area which is very facts based and where teachers are depositing facts in students' heads, and then students are simply regurgitating those or memorizing those, and then ultimately students are just going to forget it later on. Well, I want my students to understand that science is their world. Science occurs around them every day. It occurs inside of them every day. And I want them to find meaning in that. And I want them to find that awesome and cool. Not just because I'm a science nerd, but because I want them to really enjoy what they're learning and build that relevance in their life. So to do that within this paper, I first just took a look at what I believe science curriculum is like currently, and a few basic things. I think that it's very inch deep, mile wide. There's a lot covered, but not to maybe the level of complexity or deepness that it should be. I also think that because it's such a facts-based subject area, that the teacher has a strong presence in a science classroom, and it doesn't have to be that way. So some suggestions that I brought to light within this paper were that students should be given freedom. Students should be allowed to think about science in ways that are unique to them, to take experiences that these students have and let them explain the science behind those experiences. So in this way, I tried to morph the ideologies of both Ralph Tyler and John Dewey to create maybe a template, or maybe a model is probably a better word, a model for science curriculum, which is both structured, but also allows the student to be themselves and to learn for themselves and to be that individual learner. I think too often when we think of John Dewey, I think teachers are hesitant to totally use his ideologies because it kind of seems like a free-for-all. But it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be that way. And then, Ralph Tyler is very structured. Well, if you bring these two together, it's the best of both worlds in my mind. Ralph Tyler, the big thing that I wanted to focus on is that we're providing students goals. We're providing them these educational objectives, but it's up to them to get there with us as their guide, of course. So along with that, along with this model, I took another spin within this paper, and I kind of wanted to provide maybe more insight as to how the science curriculum could actually be delivered. And to do that, I really focused on critical pedagogues like Paulo Freire and Maxine Greene, who are all about the individual and living within the curriculum and creating relevance. And one of the big things that I discussed in this paper was we need to let kids talk. We need to let them, use their interests and provide them the opportunity to learn from one another. It's not just teacher to student. It's not just me telling a student that inertia is a property of matter and that it's dependent on an object's mass. Like it's not just me to the student. It's student to student. It's student to teacher. I should be able to learn from the students as well. So I think that with the model that I present with John Dewey and Ralph Tyler, and also infusing this critical pedagogue ideology and this inclusion of dialogue within the curriculum, I'm really trying to hone in on the idea that science does not have to be just a facts-based content area. And it doesn't have to be one where students just memorize something and then forget it. It can be one where students really can build relevance and they can understand that science occurs around them each and every day. I want my students to be driving in their car and they take a turn really sharply and their coffee spills in their lap and they go, huh, Newton's first law, inertia. Like that's what my goal is as a teacher, because that's what I do and my wife gets really annoyed with me. So ultimately with this paper, I wanted to analyze science education as a whole, the curriculum, the execution of that curriculum, and provide suggestions on how that can be improved. All right, so now moving on from my first artifact. My second artifact to demonstrate mastery of this first standard, which was understanding and are able to apply knowledge and skills specific to their discipline, I've included my differentiation portfolio from CNT 803, which was all about differentiation in the classroom. Within my differentiation portfolio, I've included several things. First and foremost, well, not first and foremost, but first on here, I have an introduction to my parents, because not only do I want my students to understand why I do the things that I do, which may be slightly unorthodox compared to what they're used to, but I want my parents to understand. I want my students' parents to understand my rationale as well. I firmly believe that the things that I'm doing are going to be allowing students to be successful in my science classes, but it's also going to prepare them for their future. And I hope that I make that clear to students within my classroom, but also to my parents. Now, arguably the most important thing within this differentiation portfolio are the strategies that I've included here. And I really believe that these strategies highlight my educational philosophy, again, which is I want my students to be individual learners, and I want them to ultimately be prepared for their future and to be lovers of learning for their entire lives. So some of the strategies that I've included in this portfolio, I have chalk talks. I talk about curriculum compacting, and this was actually a group project that I did with a couple of my peers within this program. There's also graphic organizers, learning contracts. Two of the ones that I really want to highlight, though, I flip my classroom. So I really want my class time, the time that I have with my students, I want it to be spent applying class content. Again, referencing back to my idea of what science curriculum should be, I don't want to be just depositing facts into students. I want them to be able to make that stuff relevant to them. So the best way that I've found to do this is to flip my classroom. So I'll have my students watch those video lectures outside of class, whether it's introducing content or debriefing something that we did in class. Just very short video lectures which touch upon the big things, and then we really apply those big things in the class, and we hone in on them, and we make them more complex, and we understand the more intricate details of those big concepts. Another strategy that I've utilized are online lessons. So I could assign these for a student to do for homework, or this could be something that we do in class. But the main key with these online lessons is that the student is able to do them at their own pace, and they're able to kind of explore these things on their own to create that individual relevance. So here's an example of an online lesson that I created for a space science unit, where we had some driving questions, and then students conducted research, and they did little activities, and they did online simulations to then understand what black holes are. So the big thing that I think that this differentiation portfolio highlights is that I understand how to differentiate, and I understand these techniques, but ultimately what this portfolio is showcasing is showing my understanding of how to differentiate based on my content and based on my students. I want my students to all learn how to do physics. I want them all to understand conceptually what's going on, understand mathematically how this stuff is working. And to do that, I need to differentiate appropriately for them. I need to give them different opportunities to showcase their mastery. And personally, with my flipped classroom, with these video tutorials, that is my big built-in differentiation strategy, because students are able to watch these as many times as necessary. They always have me in class to ask questions, to elaborate on something further, to clear up a misconception that they might have. But these other strategies also can be tailored to individual students. They can be scaffolded in different ways to get all students to those same objectives that I talked about in my first artifact. So, in summary, with this ePortfolio and with this graduate program, ultimately, I want to become a director of curriculum and instruction. Education is something that I'm super passionate about. And I was pretty naive going into this program. And I would be the first to tell you that I'm still a work in progress as an educator. But through this program, I've developed a lot of knowledge and I've developed a lot of skill, primarily in terms of curriculum and school improvement, but also I've learned a ton about, why technology is so important and why differentiation is so important and how to intentionally use those kind of things in my classroom and ultimately within a whole school to make sure that every student is receiving the best education possible. So with that being said, I just want to thank all of my professors for the wonderful education that you've given me. And I hope that I can make you proud and I can be a successful teacher in the present, in the future, and ideally a very successful director of curriculum and instruction. So thank you for your time and take care.